Dom and Johnny in the morning. Okay, so today's series of questions come from Eric, one of our adult students. And we were talking about this just before we started recording, so maybe we can kind of pull it back a little. But his question is, how is teaching adults different than teaching kids?
All right. Yeah.
Do you have any thoughts, or do you want me to kick it off?
You can kick it off. Adults are just big kids anyways, right?
It is funny, actually. That's a joke we've been making because we have a few students who started their level 1 instructor training, which you can know what that means if you go to the episode instructor training. We joke that every class is really explorers. It's just different degrees. So even in the adult class, it's like, why are they hitting the bags? Like, why are they just kind of thwacking things, like, swinging their arms around? We have the brown and black belt class. They just start all making this, like, noise at all, and they're like a hive mind. So one kid does it, and all 9 of them start doing it. So yeah, adults really are just big kids. And, especially our adults, they're so awesome. Like, every time it's their birthday, they're like, we get to play Gaga, right? So I love how lighthearted our adults are. I know not every adult program is like that, even, in our system, but definitely across systems. So I do find that I think it can be summed up best with front position. So front position, what it represents is there's a fist, which is usually the right hand, and that symbolizes kind of the physical side of the art. And then the left hand, which covers it, kind of like paper covers rock, symbolizes the mental part, or the mindfulness, or the wisdom. So I really think ultimately the difference comes down to, with kids, they have an abundance usually of the physical side, so it's engaging their mind. So, not necessarily keeping them still, but just imparting the lesson of moving mindfully as opposed to just moving. And for adults, it's usually the opposite. Usually adults are in my experience, pretty mentally engaged, and they will love to stand around and talk about martial arts. So it's getting them moving, and it's really teaching their body some of the sophisticated coordination that the kids sometimes the kids don't get the sophisticated coordination, but they'll move a lot more. So it's kind of reining it back. Whereas adults, it's the opposite. It's kind of like getting them revved up. So that's like kind of my start to this. I don't know if you had anything to add to it.
I've always liked teaching the different groups for pretty much those exact reasons. You get to be like crazy high energy with the kids, and then you get to be a little bit more on the professor side with the adults. So being a coach is more, thinking like go, 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 just getting them doing a drill and just getting them moving and providing little feedback but more encouragement. So it's fun, it's high energy. And when you start to step more into the professor role, there's less movement and more, digging deep. It becomes more theory. And I think it's really cool when you get to flex both of those muscles. And you get to flex like a tiny bit of the professor with the kids, but it's mostly coach. And then you get to flex, a little bit less the coach with the adults, because if you go too coach with the adults, they'll leave. They'll rebel. And then, but you get to be more on the professor side. So that's why I always liked the two different groups. And then teens are kind of in the middle, where you get to be like a 50-50 mix. If you get too coachy, they will rebel.
Yeah.
But if you get too professory, they'll just tune you out. So you kind of have to find that happy medium.
Well, and it also, the professor-coach dynamic also comes up a lot just within the rank progression. So if you've got a white, yellow, orange belt, you really shouldn't be doing too much professoring because they don't have that much stuff yet. So part of it is, our beginner curriculum is very simple because it is something that's easily programmable so that the body will have a greater probability of reacting appropriately, to a given situation than some of the more complex stuff that you see in the advanced ranks. So that being said, because it's simple on the outside, you can still kind of hurt yourself. So Ken has told this story a few different times where when he started training back in either 89 or 90, I can't remember which one. He had a friend who was training alongside him, and they were both yellow belts, and his friend got mugged in a parking lot. And he really just remembered 6 combination, and he like kicked off one guy and was able to get in his car and drive away. So the skill translated successfully in the sense that he lived. He was able to defend himself, and he broke his foot and was out of training for a while. So part of the refinement of coaching, the little things, but then a lot of physical practice, is, you can teach how to throw a kick, but then how to form the foot, make sure that your base leg is rooted properly, making sure you're not going to hurt yourself throwing the kick. That there's a little bit of professor, but a lot of coach, kind of like you said.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that also ties into, a little biomechanics and kinesiology.
Yeah.
Because the brain, when it receives outside input, it starts calculating immediately, and it makes these small corrections based on like the muscle groups. And, your brain will be like, maybe a little bit more of this muscle, a little bit less of this muscle, a little bit more of this muscle. And it creates this synergistic muscle group to make things easier the next time, which is really cool. And I think because adults have so much more refined muscle movement, you get that opportunity to be a little bit more professor too. And with the adults, that's a great example of the guy breaking his foot. Mm-hmm. Because, repetition, the more he does it, he probably would have flexed his foot correctly.
Right.
So you still need a little bit of coach for the adults too. But yeah, I think from a teacher's perspective, I think both are super rewarding, because it reminds me, especially with the kids sometimes, it reminds me how much I need repetition too. It's so easy to jump in and want to just learn. But if you're not, getting a crazy amount of repetition on each one of those things, then it's just stacking more skills on top of unrefined skill. Yeah. So, because I love to train. Mm-hmm. You know that. I would train 7 days a week if I could. Yeah. And I try and do that. But, I still have to go home and, practice all this stuff and make sure that I'm refining it. So if I take a lesson with Master Ken on Friday, and then I take a jiu-jitsu lesson on Tuesday, or then a lesson with Rob on Wednesday, or then, my workout on Thursday that I do with Brian, and then maybe Master Capozzo does his instructor workout on Friday. Mm-hmm. And I've never actually practiced all those things outside of those lessons. Yeah. Then I have like 6 random skills that may or may not correlate with no actual refinement. So it's super important, especially if you like to train, that you are getting a ridiculous amount of repetition, outside of those lessons, because otherwise it's just not you're gonna break your foot.
Well, and I think that's really, if we're talking about the professor versus the coach, that's one of the big differences, is that when you're a professor, like let's say at the university level, you're giving a lecture, and the agreement is that your students are going to do work outside of that lecture in order to refine their understanding or play with the concepts or do their homework. So, especially when you're starting to look at the black belt or mastery level in the context of our system, a lot of those classes do end up being more professory, because the next level is now so dense, even if the actual content is pretty simple. Like 6 combination is pretty simple content, but it has very deep application of all the different ways it can be applied and everything. So like you almost have to spend more time professoring so that you can install the new program, but now you have to leave it to the actual students to practice it on their own. And I do think that is, in general, the nice thing about teaching adults is that they're pretty self-sufficient. With kids, you have to be there to just try to, be an engine for them. Like, you are putting in a lot of energy to get them to do stuff. Whereas with adults, you're freer to do some of the more professory type stuff, because you can trust the fact that they'll practice on their own to reach their own goals. And sometimes you do need to be there as a little bit of external motivation, but in general, like, their needs are completely different.
I've been telling some of my older juniors and teens, that because especially a couple of them, have started asking about testing. So they're like, hey, what am I testing? Used to be a taboo question, but I don't really mind it.
Yeah, I don't either.
It gives me the opportunity to say, well, how often are you practicing at home?
Right.
And then, you get or you get the ones that say, I practice at home every day. And you're like, you do not.
Yeah. Or you do, you just don't practice mindfully.
Yeah.
Right? You're just kind of going on autopilot and just running through stuff haphazardly,
And that's the ETAs that we do, and I've started. I think I mentioned on another podcast before, but when my kids are doing their ETAs, I said, I always give them the prompt. When you guys are practicing for self-discipline, you want to try and make each one, and then I stop and they say stronger than the last one.
Yep.
Because it gets them out of the habit of just repetition, which is good. But
yeah,
there still needs to be, some sort of outside input. Back to kinesiology, the outside input can be an instructor saying that was good, but you should probably bend your knees a little bit more.
Right.
But that can only go so far. They need the internal. It's like an internal external.
Mm-hmm.
It's technically considered external, but they need to be able to understand when they're making a mistake too, and that's a vastly different skill, and I think those ETAs really help with that. And I think adults understand that a little bit better than kids too.
Yes.
So it's, kids, they'll do it, and then they're like, I looked amazing. And you're like, all right, buddy.
Actually, just to explain it a little, because I don't know if this has come up on the podcast before, so just in case it hasn't, when we talk about ETAs, those initials stand for experience through action, and basically what it means is that the way we run classes, we have different sections of class where we focus on particular things, and in between those sections, we have the students practice for 60 seconds on their own. The other name we're playing with is R time, because the R can mean lots of different things. For the instructors, it could be a reboot or a reset or recovery. One of the functions of those 60 seconds of practice is it also forces the instructor to see if the students actually understood and can perform the information they were having them practice, so you can make last-minute corrections. On the student side of things, it's teaching them how to practice without needing to be micromanaged. So a lot of instructors fall into the trap of they always do it alongside the student, or they're always right there to make the correction if they need it. And a lot of long-term learning occurs when someone's struggling with something. And whether it's their own discomfort or the discomfort of the student being uncomfortable, a lot of instructors alleviate that struggle a little too quickly. And so the 60 seconds of practice really forces everybody to kind of sit back. And, obviously if they're making a mistake in the form, you don't want them to keep practicing it incorrectly. But the students, they're learning how to practice mindfully, like you said. The other difference I find between kids and adults is that, why they're training. So kids, a lot of times, they're training because maybe their parents told them to. Maybe they're self-motivated in the sense that, they watch Power Rangers and they want to do that. But a lot of times, the lesson that a lot of kids I find need, it's a little more endurance-based. Whereas with adults, I'm going to use a word that it's probably not the best word, but it's the best word I have at the moment. It's therapeutic in the sense that it's balancing out their system, increasing their skeletal muscle, there's a lot of health benefits and also mental health benefits in the sense that, you're less afraid if you can defend yourself. So there's I find that for a lot of adults, what we're really teaching is productive recovery. Whereas with kids, sometimes they give up a little too fast. So it's being able to instill a sense of knowing when to push a little bit more. Usually, kids don't need to learn how to make modifications or whatever. There are obvious examples to the contrary. But for adults, sometimes when we modify something, it's not because we just want to relieve discomfort. It's because we want to take the healthiest path.
Mm. Yeah, I noticed that with things like roundhouse kicks, especially with hip issues.
Right, or knee issues.
Knee issues, exactly. Yeah, and even though when you get really good at it, you should be able to take most of the pressure off the knee. Just between becoming efficient and not knowing it, there's so many times where even I've been like, ooh, did not pivot as much as I should have.
Right.
And someone with a hip issue that could be debilitating. So yeah, actually, one of my instructors with 4 combination does a front kick because he can't turn his hip over. So, or as he says, he gets one good roundhouse kick a night.
So the follow-up question, which I thought was really interesting that Eric asked, was, there's a difference between teaching adults and teaching kids, even though adults are really big kids. What's the additional layer that gets added when the adult you're teaching is a parent of a student that you also train?
Well, that's wonderful. That's a great question because I think parents training ends up being a super valuable resource to their kids. Mm-hmm. But going into something I don't think we talked as much about, I know we said professor versus coach, but also application becomes a very different conversation between kids and adults. Because not to reference Family Guy, but it's absolutely hysterical, Peter against the little black belt girl.
Yes.
And he punches her in the face and knocks her down and says, I don't care what belt you are, I am an adult. And the fact is, even though I'm super certain that, with the right move, one of our children could probably do, a significant amount of damage to an adult.
Yep.
It is still unlikely that an 8-year-old child, regardless of belt rank, is going to take out, a 200-pound man.
Right.
It's just, unfortunately, going that deep into application is not helping them.
Yeah.
Who they're defending themselves against is going to be like people at recess. In which case, do you want your child, front kicking another child in the groin and then breaking their nose? Probably not. If there's kids being, less than nice at recess, a lot of times the personal safety stuff, it ends up being more beneficial.
Yeah.
And then a lot of times with the combinations and the forms, learning the structure is more about coordination, balance, muscle development, all the skills that are going to benefit them health-wise, but then as they grow up, flipping that switch from non-self-defense to self-defense ends up becoming really easy because they have all the tools, they just haven't, unlocked that barrier. And then with adults, a lot of times you unlock it right from the start, just because, one, most adults, at least from the ones that I get, usually on their intake sheets, it's one of 2 things, and that's fitness or self-defense. Mm-hmm. You sometimes get community, and I've seen a lot of adults write self-control before, which I understand because I have self-control issues when it comes to snacks. So self-control is something, and self-discipline is something that, adults struggle with too. But fitness and self-defense tend to be the big 2 for adult students. And so you get to dive into that more, and having the adults understand that might not be the best thing to relay to your children as you're working with them is tough. Even for me, because sometimes when I'm working with my nephew, sometimes I go a little bit more, in depth. But at the same time, I hope, I try and instill that notion that, using your martial arts is a last resort. Mm-hmm. Because I don't think, he's going to ever run into a situation. He might, but maybe 99% sure he's not going to run into a situation until he's much older where he ever needs it. Even when he's older. I haven't been attacked since I started karate. Yeah. I'm still waiting for that ninja to jump out of a tree, like Master Ken used to say.
Yeah.
But I am grateful of my balance. I'm grateful of my muscle development, the fact that I've slipped and fallen and not hurt myself.
Oh, thanks. I slipped and fell this morning and hurt myself.
Well, scrapes.
Oh, yeah.
Nothing.
Still grumpy about it.
Yeah. So I think, I know that was a long-winded explanation, but I think that would be the biggest takeaway for adults when they're training with their children, is just knowing what's important to them versus what's important to the child.
I think the way I would sum it up is it really is just a shift in perspective. And I think if you're an adult that's a parent that's training, and your kid also trains, I think you just have the opportunity of having a fuller perspective than just an adult who trains. Not that there's anything wrong with just an adult who trains. It's just you get to look at the system of how we teach a little more holistically rather than just through your own experience. To kind of relate it to women's self-defense, because I just ran a women's self-defense workshop a few weeks ago. The key thing that we really talk about is you don't need to incapacitate your attacker. The goal is to create enough of a disruption that you can get help, right? So, and that takes a lot of pressure off, because, you know, if you're like an 18-year-old college freshman, you don't have to become Bruce Lee overnight, and you don't need to, you know, try to like keep going until the other person's dead. The idea is that you just, you know, you have some targets that you can aim toward, that no matter how much they work out, they're going to be sensitive, you know, the eyes, the throat, the groin, like you target those things specifically. Yup, yeah. we practice the tiger claw under the chin into the eyes a little bit. And that can incapacitate someone, but that's not the point. And I think when you're looking at like teaching a kid against an adult, that situation, it's the same thing. Like that's why Fred Villari started with the ballistic arts, because if you're 8 and an adult picks you up and you can get your thumb in their eye, then that may not incapacitate them, but it may disrupt them enough. It has a greater probability of disrupting them enough that you have a better chance of getting away. And that's what I mean by perspective is, you know, I've talked to some parents, they want their kid to be able to like take on a 200-pound male, like you said. And I'm like, your 5-year-old daughter isn't going to do that. I can teach her things that help, but I don't want to create an illusion that, you know, she's going to be an anime character by the time she's done with her first class. So, and I think that's really it. It's just perspective. So a lot of the parents that I've been able to speak to, I think we talked about this in another episode too, we get to show them as adults, this is why this combination or this technique is built the way it is. This is how you're incapacitating another person as an adult against an adult. For the kids, because we frame it as more health, wellness, the things you mentioned, it creates a kind of mental restraint that's not making it super clear the violence that they're capable of. So probability-wise, that violence has less of a chance of manifesting inappropriately, like a kid at recess or something.
Yeah,
so,
absolutely.
and that's, I personally, I find that to be a moral responsibility of us as instructors. To use a Thanksgiving example, because we're recording this right after Thanksgiving, you don't need to cook everything on high heat, Grandma. Like, there's a reason there's a medium heat or a medium low. Like, sometimes, depending on what you're cooking, you need different temperatures. And in the same sense, you know, you don't want a kid being pushed in the shoulder a little bit and to have the flip switch where now we're aiming for the eyes and the groin. Like, we want to make sure that it matches. And, you know, post-COVID, we had wasn't a lot, but it was still a frightening number of students that were signing up, because when kids first went to go back to school in our area, it would be like 3-4 kids ganging up on one kid at a time, and it got really violent.
That
and so
is not social distancing.
No, well, and that's why they signed up, was it was like, how do I keep myself safe? And again, you're an 8-year-old, you're not going to fight off 4 other 8-year-olds. And if you successfully defend yourself against one, it may make the other 3 start to reconsider, the risk mitigation, like just, maybe we'll beat him by ganging up. But do I want to risk getting hit? And that's, we really don't emphasize that a lot. And in the few cases where it's been a concern, we have taught individual students lessons a little beyond their age and rank, if it's appropriate to the concerns of their situation. To be honest, I've only seen benefits of having parent adult students, in the sense that, a lot of them have been watching their entire kid's progression from white to black belt. So, they come in, we start showing a form, and especially if they have some kind of athletic background, which was an episode we did earlier too, they can kind of pick up the moves a little bit quicker because they know what to expect, which now, because they can practice the raw movement a little bit more on their own, now we can start diving into either the more complex coordination lying under the surface or the more principle-centered lessons of, either the strategy or the health and fitness development side of things. I do think that you also are now creating a training partner and an accountability buddy. So, it was funny. We actually, one of our adult students was like, I don't know how far into the ranks I'm going to get. And one of their kids was like, well, you made me talk to Miss Stephanie when I said I wanted to quit, so you have to talk to Miss Stephanie if you want. And so they have kept going because it was it was more uncomfortable to talk to Miss Stephanie than it was to just keep on practicing and doing your thing. So I do think that, my personal experience is that both of my parents trained on a very parallel rank route to myself. I started a little bit before they did. But I mean, my mom's still training as a 4th degree black belt. It's a very cool thing that I don't really get to see in a lot of other disciplines. So team sports, you may have a parent that did that team sport when they were younger, but you're usually not competitively playing baseball together as child and parent. You might have a parent that's the coach and, the kid is playing the sport, or, the kid is able to attend their parents' games or whatever, but they don't get to train alongside each other as peers. It's a very unique thing that I've only seen in the martial arts. In terms of movement, there are other board games and there are lots of ways that parents and kids can do stuff together. But in terms of just this specific discipline, I think it's a very cool thing that you get to do. Dom and Johnny in the morning.